Hasan Piker is one of America's most watched political streamers. He has almost 10 million subscribers across all social media platforms. He streams for about 6 to 8 hours a day, almost every day, about the political news of the moment from his leftist point of view. Just this year, he participated in a humanitarian aid mission to Cuba. He got banned from entering the UK ahead of several speaking engagements, and he's been featured on Fox News more times than anyone can count. But most importantly, he has started wearing suits. In May 2026, you can see the jacket and tie become Piker's consistent uniform. This is not just a moment of personal style exploration. I mean, generally when public figures have a fashion makeover, they're doing it for a very specific reason. To help figure out what Piker's wardrobe change might reflect about his place in American politics and how other political actors use clothing as a political tool, I recruited an expert with much better credentials than my own.
I'm Jamel Bowie. I'm a columnist for the New York Times opinion section, and I co-host the podcast Unclear and Present Danger with my buddy John Gans.
And just briefly say what you cover generally in your work.
Yeah, so I cover politics and history is the way I say it. What that means is that I tend to write about contemporary politics, American politics specifically, with an eye towards and informed by kind of an academic reading of American history.
So here we are in the midst of the second year of Trump's second presidency, and the U.S. is getting close to some very high-stakes midterm elections. The Democrats think that they have a chance of taking back the House, the Senate, or both. Republicans have been fighting back by doing their best to neuter the Voting Rights Act and pass a law that could disenfranchise millions of voters. And on top of that, local political battles are happening all over the country, right? These races for mayor, these races for governor, they are very much indications of where the political energy is heading. Hasan Piker is all over every bit of it. He has candidates and politicians that he believes in on his show all the time. According to Politico, he said he is just trying to identify wonderful candidates that are more responsive to the needs of the masses and push for them and get them elected, connect them with my audience. He has, I would say, recently become more mainstream, not in terms of his political views, but he has infiltrated in terms of being, though he says he's not, like a kingmaker in terms of influencing elections potentially. And also just like Fox News has taken an interest in him. He's become like a real person that people have opinions on, that media and also countries have opinions on. How do you feel? What do you think changed?
As far as I can tell, his shift towards wearing suits like predates somewhat the increased attention, or maybe they're happening around the same time, that he is both participating in electoral politics, sort of saying, I support this person, doing rallies with them. The candidate Chris Rabb, I believe is his name. I believe Piker did a rally with him. You know, having candidates on his stream, kind of giving them a chance to speak and kind of develop what's called earned media. You know, people are paying attention to it. That all happened. That's all been happening, I believe, at the same time they started wearing suits. So I'm not sure what the causation here is, but I do think it's clear that like he wants to be seen as like a serious political figure, not even mainstream's like the wrong word, like a serious political figure, whether or not you would consider him mainstream, someone whose views and platform should be taken seriously, not as a venue for entertainment, but as a place for candidates, for journalists, for whomever to watch, observe, and take seriously. And that's how I read the move towards wearing tailored clothing. And I would say, I mean, just as someone who does work at maybe the definition of establishment mainstream media, it's not even that common amongst like regular ass journalists to just wear tailoring. Like I'm kind of a weird exception in that regard. You know, one has to think about what tailoring communicates to people, right? Like not even the business suit. Because I think what's interesting about what Hasan's wearing, it's like it's not necessarily traditional business suits, right? Like, so it's not even the business suit. It's tailoring itself sends a particular message. It sends the message that I am put together, that I put thought in my appearance in a way that might signal that I put thought into the things I'm saying to you. I think that is the thing that is being communicated, or maybe I think that's the thing that like Piker is trying to communicate, that, you know, I am a serious person.
Do you think it is or will be effective?
You know, I don't know. That's a good question. Because, I mean, the other thing, you know, one of the dynamics here is I don't think you can separate this from, you know, racialization and race and racial perceptions. I wear, just use myself as an example, I wear tailoring almost every day, in part because I like it. It's what I feel comfortable in, but in part knowing that I am a Black journalist who I would describe myself as left-leaning. People have their views of that, but Black journalist, left-leaning, often quite critical of mainstream political institutions. Sorry, that's my dog. The tailoring, what it does is it helps disarm people a little bit, disarm them to an extent. Your mind doesn't move towards, like if I were wearing my gym clothes, you might think, oh, this is just like, some guy. Your mind moves towards, oh, this is someone who might be worth taking seriously. It's like noteworthy, just to go on the kind of other side of the political spectrum. In the manosphere, a lot of those guys wear suits, bad ones, but suits nonetheless. And I think it's trying to send a similar kind of message. I am someone to take seriously. You eat with your eyes, right? Like when you're encountering people in media, their presentation matters a great deal to how you're going to be receptive to them. And so to the extent that Hasan is trying to both signal to people in everyday working politics that like I am a serious person, to the extent that he's trying to signal to new viewers that I am a serious person, to the extent that he's trying to signal to candidates that he might be interested in that I am a serious person, right? I do think that the wearing suits is probably going to be effective because I think it does work. We can think of other examples in sort of politics today of figures who have made the suit part of their presentation and how it does shape perceptions of them.
Hasan has also explicitly discussed his transition from t-shirts and chains to tailoring. In an interview with Dazed, he said, "When I got the first barrage of negative coverage a couple of months ago, and a bunch of think tanks decided I was the real enemy they must forcibly excise from American politics, that's when I started wearing suits." I found one of the best places to hear Piker's reasoning from his own mouth was on the Throwing Fits podcast.
Are you trying to reclaim suits from white supremacists? Like, let's talk about the suits for a second.
A little bit. I think Zohran definitely was impactful in that decision too. But the real reason why I do it is because I got clipped so much on Fox News that I was like, if I'm wearing a suit while I'm saying the things I'm saying, those grandmothers are probably going to be much more receptive.
That's actually really smart. Yeah.
And it's literally worked.
Wow. Really?
It's
That's
actually
crazy.
worked. Yeah. Like I have.
Dress for the job you want. It's like why people wear glasses in court.
Yeah.
This guy's doing both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to see. That's
Sure.
why
But
I
you
wear
can
them.
do So there literally has been a positive impact of the suiting in terms of like the things you say being accepted by more like mainstream America.
Yes. 100%.
Fire.
No, I think we're lizard brain people, man. At the end of the day, I think like when they see something that they find to be appealing, they lock in on it. They're far more receptive to what I have to say if I'm wearing a suit when I'm saying it.
They go into a little bit more detail about the brands he's wearing, where he gets his stuff if you're trying to steal his look. But the most interesting piece of information to me was that he was inspired by Zohran Mamdani, the Social Democratic mayor of New York, to make this shift. And before we talk about that, I want to thank the sponsor for this video, Factor. I have never particularly gotten into meal prepping. It's been a real issue because especially now that I work from home, I actually make pretty much all my meals, unless I'm eating leftovers, from scratch, like in the moment before I eat it. So I'm cooking and then cleaning 3 meals a day. It's very time consuming. That is what made me excited to try Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service where the food is chef crafted, dietitian approved, and ready to eat. I ordered a couple of different meals, 2 fish options because my husband doesn't really like fish, so we don't eat a lot of fish at home, which I find to be a bummer. So doing like a single person meal is kind of the only way for me to have it at home. But I also did get some chicken-based meals because he wanted to try Factor as well. Ultimately, having pre-made meals really did make my days more productive. I didn't have to cook, I didn't have to clean. I do have a dishwasher, so I did wind up putting a lot of the Factor meals on my own plates just for the vibe. But most importantly for me, it made it easier to have vegetables in every meal, which I always struggle with when I don't have that much time. If you are interested, go to factor75.com or click the link below and use code PERSIAFB to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code PERSIAFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. PERSIAFB at factor75.com. That offer is only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchases. Now, let's get on with the rest of the video. So Piker says he was inspired by the fact that Zohran Mamdani is always wearing suits. And you have to remember, at the very beginning of his campaign, Zohran Mamdani was a pretty unlikely and unconventional candidate. And when he first started campaigning, you could see him wearing zip-up work jackets from only New York. He would wear traditional kurtas or just like a yellow sweater that he really liked. But at some point during his campaign, he starts wearing suits. He starts wearing fairly everyday, unremarkable suit supply suits, and he has maintained this look as mayor. Now, compare that choice to another political longshot, political outsider, Graham Plattner, who was the Democratic nominee to represent Maine in the US Senate. To be clear, the interview that I did with Jamel was recorded before his campaign ended, but obviously we know now that he has left the race in disgrace. I do think he's still an interesting comparison because during his campaign, he was positioned very similarly to Mamdani as a choice for voters who were sick of the Democratic establishment. Plattner and Mamdani actually shared a media strategist and image maker, Morris Katz, but their wardrobe styling could not have been more different during their campaigns. Unlike Mamdani's clean-cut millennial suit, Graham Plattner had scruffy facial hair, he liked blue-collar mainstays, he wore trucker hats and Carhartt jackets.
Yeah, I think one of the big distinctions is ideology. Not that Graham Plattner, he's quite a liberal, populist liberal candidate, but that Mamdani, as a member of Democratic Socialists of America, as a self-described Democratic Socialist, is a representative of an ideological tendency that still attracts a lot of suspicion in the United States, even in a place like New York. And so one thing I think the suit does is it does mainstream him. It does send this message of, I am a socialist, and a socialist is a guy who wears a business suit, right? I am a socialist, and a socialist is a guy who is you could find walking in a financial district.
It normalizes it.
Right. It normalizes the political identity. I think for Mamdani, too, he's sort of trying to call back, and he does this throughout all his political rhetoric. He's calling back to traditions of municipal socialism from the early 20th century, the so-called sewer socialist, who very much likewise presented themselves not as radicals, but as competent administrators of the city. We can make the sewer system work. We can clean up the police department. We can do all these practical things that will improve your life, and we do it as socialists. And so there's actually this tradition, right, of politicians with radical politics or radical adjacent politics who self-consciously present themselves in the most sort of bourgeois way possible to sort of diffuse concerns that the radicalism is bohemian, standing against common convention. There's a phrase, and I can never remember where it comes from, but it's a line from British politics. It's Tory men and Whig measures, right? So the public wants Tory men, wants people who are traditionalist and conventional and do not scare them and do not seem like they're going to upset established ways. But they also want Whig measures, activist government to improve their lives. And for Mamdani, I think he's basically trying to do that, present himself as a Tory man, although this is complicated somewhat by his religious background, by his ethnicity, but he's a Tory man offering Whig measures. Plattner's a bit different because I do think that being a white man buys you a lot of leeway. Because almost like, not to sound like, an academic, right? But like the semiotics of being a white man are such that people look at you and they kind of just assume that you are mainstream. I'm older than you, but not that much older than you, but I'm going to sound like I'm an old man now. Back in the 2012 election, way back when, 2012 election, Obama-Romney, one of the persistent things about that race is that Obama was always perceived in the public as more liberal than he was, and Mitt Romney was perceived as more moderate than he was. And, people who are, I think, professional political journalists tend to overrate the extent to which ordinary voters can actually even read and understand ideology. Like, I don't think they can. I think they're making judgments based largely off race, gender, and affect. And so in the case of Mitt Romney, who had a very radical policy platform, there's a very famous or infamous focus group where the focus group organizers just read to the participants a straightforward description of the Romney economic plan, which was like slashing taxes to the bone, unraveling Medicare and Medicaid, privatizing Social Security, and they didn't believe it. They're like, well, that's too crazy. That's too crazy. Mitt Romney doesn't seem like a guy who'd do that, right? they're looking at who he is, a kind of a staid businessman with like a very boring affect, and then they're jumping from there. They're using that to inform their sense of how extreme or not extreme he might be. So how does a white man signal to voters that, in fact, I am going to unsettle things? Where one way to do that is to reject the traditional dress of white male politicians, is to reject the business suit, is to reject the stiff dress shirt with the rolled up cuffs, and to instead, as you note, adopt a more blue collar wardrobe. You know, the guy's professionally an oyster farmer, so he wears like a Siemens Henley, I think, most of the time, and then a pair of jeans. What that allows you to do is position yourself a little bit against type, in a way that if Plattner were a woman candidate, were a non-white candidate, I don't think this hypothetical Plattner could dress that way.
Yeah. Of course, there are progressive white male candidates who wear suits during their campaigns. One midterm hopeful that comes to mind is James Tallarico, who is the Democratic nominee running to represent Texas in the U.S. Senate. Though James Tallarico wears a suit mostly, I think it's because he has a baby face.
I was just about to say he looks like a little kid. he looks like a little baby, and so I think
you have to think about the other aspects of what's going on.
I think that's exactly right. I think for Tallarico, it's to age him up somewhat.
Yeah. Now, James Tallarico is not a social democrat like Zohran Mamdani. He could reasonably be described as a populist, not unlike Graham Plattner or John Fetterman. Fetterman is, of course, that senator from Pennsylvania who's famous for always wanting to wear a hoodie and shorts, which it made other people in the Senate so mad that they passed a bipartisan resolution requiring that business attire be worn on the floor of the Senate, which for men shall include a coat, tie, and slacks or other long pants. It does make sense to me that someone who is outside of and working against the political mainstream would want to dress in a way that reflects that. But populism can mean a lot of different things. It can manifest in a lot of different ways.
Populism is one of those words that is, like, unfortunately amorphous and can be used in many different ways. Nonetheless, I think you can describe Trump as a populist once you recognize that populism isn't an ideology, but a style of doing politics. And so ideologically, since he has one, Donald Trump is this sort of avatar for like a hierarchical, white supremacist, misogynist, politics of domination. And then he pursues that through populist means, right? Like he posits that there is a singular people who are being put upon by both elites at the top and the undeserving at the bottom, that the people are the only legitimate people. And so that's a category that excludes, people who belong to the country, belong to the polity, but may not be within the people as a political construct. That's sort of classic populism. And that the solutions to the problems of the people is found in, sticking it to either the people at the top or the people at the bottom. And that those solutions are simple. They're simple attempts at sort of, taking from those who don't deserve it and giving it to those who do. And all of that's like classic populist stylings. I mean, the wrinkle there, because Trump wears these terrible business suits, but he wears these suits. One of them, I think the messages Trump is sending to the public, and especially to male voters, to men, is saying, I am kind of a wealthy patriarch. This is how wealthy patriarchs dress. And if you want to be a wealthy patriarch, you want to emulate me.
Yeah.
Or you can vote for me, and you can get some of that like wealthy patriarch pixie dust, and it'll make you like that as well. It'll trickle down. I want to make a quick point about Fetterman, because Fetterman is a really interesting case of someone who very aggressively even rejects kind of the traditional clothing of politics and has himself very centrist, non-radical politics. He is too performing a kind of populism, performing a kind of contempt for the system. But I think I think he is a fine example of how one must be wary of how much you read into these aesthetic choices.
It's a veneer.
It can very much be a veneer. And I'm not even sure in his case that like it's all that sophisticated. I kind of think he's a doofus.
I kind of think he just wanted to wear hoodies. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what's going on with him. But it's not hard to find people regretting not supporting Conor Lamb in that primary, which would have been 2022, and supporting Fetterman because Fetterman looked like the kind of guy who would be, more ideologically radical, or at least like liberal in a way that would not be so conventional. And as it turns out, that is not the case.
Yeah.
You have to pair, if you're taking signals from how people dress, you do have to pair it with like what they actually say and what they actually do.
Did the Hasan Piker thing like kind of jump out to you at all, or you were kind of just saw it and you were like, oh, he's wearing suits now?
I know I saw it. I in one of my group chats with my friends, I was like, Hasan's wearing suits these days. Because I don't follow his stream, so I think I saw like an image or a photo somewhere. Maybe he was at a rally and I noticed that he was wearing a suit. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I noticed he was wearing a suit. I noticed it was sort of a fashiony suit. I noticed he was wearing jewelry, and I was like, that's interesting. And I do think, just to kind of wrap things up, I do think it represents, as you suggested, Piker entering the world of more serious politics, or rather people taking him seriously as a political actor.
The funny thing about it, I'm sure maybe you have or haven't seen this, but a lot of leftists or communists don't like Hasan Piker. And like you were saying, because the suit is this symbol of the bourgeois, and he has enriched himself through the labor of his Twitch streaming, it does also sort of separate him from his base to a certain degree, who want him to be an anarchist, who want, they almost want a Fetterman. Like, they want someone who doesn't care and who sticks it to the man and who doesn't play by any rules. And they think that's better. But it's a little bit, it's like that's the same thing when Zohran went to meet with Donald Trump and they were like shaking hands and like generally copacetic. How much do you want to play by someone else's rules to get what you need, but maintain a sense of like trustworthiness for the people who actually do want you to be a radical?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's such a larger conversation about what specifically is leftism. Is it a political tendency aimed at trying to attain power and using it? Or is it kind of a bohemian cultural formation, right? Like, is it basically a subculture? Because I think if you view it as a subculture, or if you view the subculture as tied tightly to the politics, then the discontent with sort of visual Piker wearing suits, or visual symbols of you trying to work yourself into kind of mainstream electoral politics, that discontent makes a lot of sense. Because it's sort of like, you're selling out, right? But if your leftism is primarily trying to win power wherever you can, then you don't see that as like a concession. You see that as sort of like a necessary step of trying to win power, right? And I think I think I'm not super plugged in to internal struggles amongst the nation's leftists, but to the extent that I am, I do think an emerging division is simply between those who are like, we have to make ourselves more friendly to the normies, right? That like victory, in a sense, is when the most suburban soccer mom you can imagine identifies herself as a socialist. Then you're winning, right? Then that like you've diffused whatever stigma attaches to the politics. But then that means that if you accomplish that, then it's no longer a subculture. It's just another thing in the mainstream. And so I think it's very much leftists who, I may be exaggerating a bit, but I think the goal is to win elections, and it's to win elections by appealing to people you would identify as political normies, in part because those are, if you're contesting within the Democratic Party, those are most of the voters. And then between folks who reject electoralism and reject all the moves you have to make to accommodate electoralism, and who prefer, an extremely radical form of political action that also is tied up in like a subculture. A particular subculture with particular ways of dress and particular ways of communicating and all those sorts of things. I mean, if I had to give a read on Piker, I mean, the interesting thing is the suits he wears, the jewelry he wears with the suits, like all the accessories, do kind of say, right, that like, I'm in this, but I'm not of this, And that's interesting to me. And I feel like if you notice him starting to move away from the kind of accessories he currently uses and towards more kind of traditional looking business suits, it's also going to send a particular message.
By any means necessary. God forbid someone has to wear a suit.
Hey, I mean, by any means necessary, Malcolm X is wearing a suit in that photo.
There you go. Thank you so much for watching Close Our Political. Don't let anyone ever tell you different. And of course, thank you again to Jamel for being on the show. He was excellent, and I hope he comes back. Do you ever see someone who's running a race and be like, oh, they need an image redux? They need an image consultant?
I mean, personally, I would, if I were like advising JD Vance or something, I would be like, you got to cool it on all the eyeshadow and the makeup. Like,
Okay, yeah.
JD Vance's problem, like, as a candidate, is that he seems like a phony. And so if you have lots of like makeup on all the time and you look very manicured, it's like, yeah, you look like a phony.
Right. It enhances that idea.